Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to talk about the defense, something we don't necessarily want to do, but we have to do, about the defense against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. And here to talk about it with me, as you can see, is Jordan Coe from the Ravens Situation Room. How you doing?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me on. Happy to be sharing my face for once.
Always a pleasure, man, and always great to talk football with you, as we know. But another difficult game to watch. Obviously, to have the Ravens lose another big lead. They've lost big leads and they've lost close games, and it's difficult to see it continue.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And, we're here to talk about the defense, but, it's hard to pin this one on the Ravens defense. They played pretty well overall. I certainly some things they could have done better. But, it comes down to, I think, a different side of the ball when you take a look at what happened in this one.
Yeah, certainly were some both sides could have done a little better probably, but the offense certainly could have held the ball a little longer, could have moved the ball a little better, could have converted some opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about a lot of that as we go. Folks joining us, glad to see you here. A fair number of you already here, and want to hear your questions and comments. We'll try and get to them as I go. I'll try and plunk them up on the screen. We have a mailbag segment at the end. If we miss some, we'll hope to get to some of them then. And Jordan, you and I will kind of share responsibility for watching this feed as it goes. Thanks for taking for folks who are listening to this as a podcast. You won't actually get to see those, but we'll talk through some of these. So 5 consecutive home losses now by a total of 12 points. Incredible, frankly. A couple of 1-point losses last December. I believe it's a 2, a 3, and a 4. No, that's not quite right, but it's in that ballpark. Might be a 3, a 3, and a 4 now in other losses.
Yeah, it's really surprising to see. Some of this dates back to non-Lamar time, but when we're looking at Lamar and what Lamar has been able to do for this team, in these close games, he's undercredited, I think, a little bit for his ability to come back and put this team back in games. And so, this one was a little bit of a disappointment in that it was him and not Huntley, and they still couldn't find their way to get over the hump. And obviously, the 17-point giveaway is the bigger stinger.
Yeah, and to lose two of these games in succession by 2 of the largest margins they've ever blown in leads. They blew a 21-point lead. I remember against the Steelers on a great double event day in Baltimore. You had a playoff game for baseball going on the same day you had a football game, and I left the Memorial Stadium to go to Camden Yards, and the Ravens were up 21-0, and they blew the game while we were at Camden Yards. So that wasn't pleasant.
Yeah. It's just rough to see these big time losses in big moments. And, obviously what are going to be important games also down the stretch, when you're looking at standings. I mean, this is essentially, I think, is an eliminating factor for the Ravens being a serious contender for the bye, unless something really implodes for Buffalo on the other side of this. And so, I think either loss they could have maybe gotten by, especially with Miami picking off Buffalo. But with both of them, it's a pretty big setback from an AFC perspective.
It is. I think it's a fairly balanced AFC at this point. You have the Bills, and they appeared to be the strongest team in the conference, I would have said. And then they go ahead and get beat by Miami. They come in and win a very tight one here against the Ravens, where I don't think they looked like they dominated the Ravens, certainly from start to finish. But the conference top to bottom is very balanced. In fact, if the playoffs started today, I believe the Ravens would be the 7th seed at 2-2. So, you don't have no one's undefeated in the conference. Only 2 3-1 teams, I believe, right now with Buffalo. No, Buffalo, Miami, Kansas City are all 3-1, aren't they? So got 3-1 teams.
Yep.
But anyway, tight conference, lots of time to come back still. We're coming into a really important week right away against the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, it's a big one. And, I expect the Ravens to bounce back a little bit in the Cincinnati game and kind of be forced to rise to the occasion. They get that. It's a Monday night game, I think, so they get that extra day to prepare as well. So they kind of – is it a Sunday night game or is it Monday night next week?
Sunday night.
So they get a little bit of extra time. But I think they're going to come out kind of ready and prepared and they seem to answer the bell in the New England game, and I think we're going to see something similar in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree. The combination of things is creating a really uncomfortable environment, I think, for Harbaugh right now. He's under fire, obviously, for all the close losses, but he's also under fire for what's the talk of the week now, or the talk of the day since it happened, the fourth and goal decision from the 2 yard line. And so I kind of want to talk about this for a few minutes here because it's one of these decisions that I think. I don't think it'll affect Harbaugh's job. I think Bisciotti is extremely clever about understanding how decisions are made and what's going on. They're following their process of using a model. But one of the issues with using models at all, and I hate calling this analytics because it's basic decision tree mathematics. It's the most simple thing. We learned this in high school, folks. Literally, I hate to make it more than what it is. Okay. But one of the things about these models and about using math to make your decisions and not taking the coward's way out, and there have been indices for that too, about cowardly punts in particular, is that it creates a lot of high leverage plays. And high leverage plays create debate over whether the high leverage decision was correct. When, punting on 4th and 1 is not examined the same way. Maybe it is more than it used to be, but it's not examined from the same way as going for a 4th and 2 with the game tied.
Yeah, well, and this one, I mean, for whatever you want to say about models, et cetera, this one was a pretty clear go for me. The Ravens literally had the worst outcome possible happen here because not only do you not complete the play, but you also have a 20-yard swing in terms of field position, which is a big part of the decision, is the fact that if you don't convert, barring a turnover, and even with a loss of 1 or 2 yards on the ground, you've got Josh Allen backed up. You've forced them a bit to kind of either have to run the ball or get the ball out quickly. You have 3 or 4, or at least a couple downs where situationally you know what you're going to get, and you get to attack them that way, and you lose that factor when you throw the interception. And so obviously hindsight is 2020, but if they were on the 1 instead of on the 20, I think that would have made a really big difference for ultimately what ended up happening in that last drive too. And people want to overlook that. Like, the outcome that happened was common. I mean, look at the number of times Lamar has thrown the ball from kind of the 2-yard line, starting, inside the red zone. And they're unfortunately of the 3 or 4 times he's turned the ball over now, 2 of them have been interceptions to Buffalo, in weather games, in really high stakes potential games as well. So that's all super unfortunate, but I mean, you're a math guy, you get this, that sometimes that's just the way the dice break. And it didn't work out perfectly, and it was worst case scenario, obviously. I think in almost every possible way for what the outcome ended up being.
Yeah, I see a comment from Logan here that says that he thinks the 4th down call was the right decision. Unfortunately, just the worst possible outcome. I would agree. I mean, there are worst possible outcomes. It could have been a pick 6. It could have been a fumble return for a touchdown on a sack, say. But it's a 95th percentile negative consequence of result, I should say. And it really changes the expected points dramatically to start at the 1 or the 2 instead of the 20. And Harbaugh couldn't have been expecting that thing, but either way, even if he feared an end zone interception, it doesn't change the math of the situation. You still have risk you take to try and get ahead. There's the other side of this: is what would they have gained by the various choices they could have made? So let's call the 3 automatic. It wouldn't have been necessarily completely automatic, but pretty damn close with Justin Tucker and more important, the weather and the holder, I think, in this game. That's what I actually stayed around for the last, moment of the game to make sure Buffalo made the field goal. Obviously hoping they missed it, but the hold was a little bit tricky in this situation. So if they score 3, the big giveaway from that, or if they score at all for that matter, is that it changes the game from 3-down defense to 4-down defense. So if you don't score and the game is tied, it's a 3-down defensive opportunity for your team. Meaning they can stop Josh Allen on 3 downs, and the Bills have to seriously consider punting, depending on down and distance, at the end of that point, which is huge. There's another factor I'll get to, but I want to let you comment on that before I move on.
Well, I think that may not actually be the case either. Buffalo is pretty aggressive in terms of how it goes on 4th downs. There was a situation earlier in the game where I thought that they were going to kick the field goal, and they went for it. And the Ravens, if not for an amazing play by Allen getting outside of the grasp of Owe, would have stopped them in that situation too. So I think the Buffalo, as long as they weren't in like third and very long kind of situation, I think they've got the kind of demeanor where they would be going for it. So, I don't know that it changes that dynamic as drastically as it might with another team.
Okay, and that's probably true in terms of the analytics, but I am going to say it eliminates them going forward on 4th and 6 on their own side of the field, or situations like that. Probably 4th and 3 on their own side of the field. Whether or not they go for it on 4th and 2 from their own 40, that would become a more interesting question and maybe more team dependent. And if you're up against the Chargers and their current coach, he might go for it. I don't know. In the case of the Bills if they would really risk it. You got the Ravens on their back foot with a terrible half of offensive football. You might decide to kick that ball if that game is still tied. The Ravens still wouldn't have scored since halftime at that point. So I'm really not sure, but I think you're probably right. There is a slice of 4th down situations where you're still playing 4-down football in those circumstances. I don't know how much more 4-down football you're playing in that situation than at any other time during the game. Okay. All right, now let's talk about the other side of this, though, that the Ravens could have scored 7 on the play. Now, if they score 7, what do they gain additionally from that as opposed to scoring 3? Well, obviously, it's a lead in either case, but the 7 points is a touchdown, ties the game, or forces a 2-point conversion try, which for these purposes, we're going to call the equivalent of tying the game. But I think the interesting thing it does is it changes the time dynamic of the game. You can't slow play a touchdown drive the way you can slow play a field goal drive or even a field goal minimum touchdown maximum drive. We look back at Ravens history, December 25th, 2016. They lost a game to the Steelers that I've whined about a lot since. We had the Ravens go ahead by 3 points. They were down 4. They went ahead by 3 on Kyle Juszczyk's 10-yard touchdown run, where they broke through on 3rd and 1. And I said that the order's got to be in the huddle to down that ball at the 1-yard line, because otherwise you're giving Pittsburgh a chance to come back from a 3-point deficit with about a minute and a half left, I think it was. And they obviously it wasn't there. They could have drained the clock pretty much entirely if they'd been 2 plays later, drained most of it, including the Pittsburgh timeout, if they'd scored 1 play later. So, and then of course the immaculate extension, as they call it now, in Pittsburgh happened, and they won the division on that play. So really unfortunate kind of situation, but we have an analog in Ravens history that tells you don't be up 3 in that situation when you're giving a team a long field. It's 4-down football with a field goal minimum and touchdown maximum for the win.
Yeah, obviously, optimally, you score the touchdown there. I mean, that's what the Ravens are trying to do, regardless in that situation. What you just saying that actually triggered something that you said earlier, which was that a worst case scenario might have been a pick 6, and I don't know that that's necessarily true in the way that the game ended up, because you would have gotten the ball back, and the Ravens tried to let them score. And for whatever, Owe finally decides to make a tackle. No, that's taking it too far. He actually didn't have that terrible of a game, but he did have a couple moments where he missed some big tackles. Finally comes up and makes a tackle in that situation when it would have been worthwhile to miss that one. So, obviously the touchdown is optimal in that situation. I know we're here to talk about the defense. It really looked like J.K. Dobbins was out of gas even before Justice Hill got hurt. And once they started feeding him the ball, when he did get hurt, I thought he just looked cooked and he was done. And I wonder how much that, it didn't seem like that was a factor, but on the what was it, the second down play after the Duvernay, reception to the 2-yard line, Dobbins had a cutback lane and he just never even tried to get there. He just looked like he was gassed, that he was done. Like in terms of, you got a guy that's coming back, you got to make, it frustrates me in that sense, I guess, or that if that's how the Ravens felt, like they weren't going to be able to run the ball, and Buffalo felt like they knew that when they were running the ball, they were going to be able to stop them. Maybe that is consideration that you have to kick the field goal there, though, because it takes away a really high percentage portion of your ability to score or not have to turn the ball over, or the whoopsies, blow up plays happen when you're throwing the ball there.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the funny things on the 4th and 2 play, you saw Mike Davis was in the game, split wide left.
I didn't notice that.
Okay,
I only
sorry,
watched
wide left
it
is not
one
right.
time extra.
Yeah. So he was slot left. He didn't even play that many snaps. I mean, I didn't notice him in the game before then. I have to actually look and see how many snaps he played on the game there. He played, let's see, 2 offensive snaps. And of course, one of them is the most important, highest leverage snap of the game. And he wasn't really covered in the slot. They had an opportunity to rotate their coverages and create something that it might have been a trick to try and get Jackson to throw the ball to Davis, but Davis looked like off the line of scrimmage. There was kind of an off coverage on him, and the outside guy could have moved in to make a play on the football potentially. So yeah, it's not like there was no chance they had to make that play. But anyway, strange that he would be on the field, and you don't really have a better option because Justice Hill's hurt, and Dobbins, as you say, had taken a fairly significant workload in terms of his ramp up. I want to mention one more thing about scoring a touchdown. When it come back to the timing of the return touchdown to tie the game, we've got another analog in Ravens history. Very similar situation, which demonstrates the redraw value of being up 7. So if you're up 7, the other team then has to score a touchdown to tie, presumably. Then what happens? The Ravens get the ball again if there's any time left on the clock. It is hard to match up time with a touchdown drive. Teams are loath to do it. They want to score as quickly as possible and take the risk of giving up a field goal. But if you think back to the Lamar Bathroom game, Lamar came back in through a 4th and 5 touchdown to put the Ravens up 7. Actually, with the 2-point conversion put them up 7. And then the Browns scored, and they scored just a little too fast. And the Ravens then had time to drive down the field about 50 seconds or so, I think it was, maybe a little bit less even, get in a field goal range where Tucker kicked a 55-yarder to win. Then we had the safety on the very last play of the game to screw up all the betting lines. I'm sure that might have, it probably did not impact you, but you never know. So we've got analogs for both of these situations. It's not like they're rare situations that come up that there aren't reasons for it. And I honestly feel pretty good about Harbaugh's decision making in this game.
Yeah, I would have made the same call. I thought that was at the down and distance that I was at was a pretty easy decision for them to make. And we'll never know, but there were certainly a couple moments on the defensive side of the ball once the Bills got the ball back that were, the OA tackle that I referenced earlier that took away any opportunity for the Ravens to at least have a chance. And the other was the ridiculous roughing the passer penalty call that came in the game. And you can't, obviously, look, you can't blame these kind of things on the refs. But I've just got to say, and I was tweeting this during the game, this was one of the poorest and imbalanced officiated games I think that I have ever watched. And I think that the Ravens have gotten the crap end of the ref take a lot. And obviously, any fan is going to tell you that their team has, unless they root for Tom Brady, in which case they never have, and they don't know what that experience is like. But the only other game that I felt equally as frustrated was the Tom Brady 2-touchdown lead game with Flacco, when the Patriots were abusing the eligible and ineligible receiver rules, and they were quick snapping, and they were marking the same guys as eligible and ineligible at the same time. The Ravens couldn't decipher it. The refs wouldn't slow the game down, and they didn't know who to cover. And that was probably the other game that I was as close to as frustrated as this one.
That was very frustrating. That was in the 2014 AFC divisional game, I guess it was. They won their first game. I'm trying to remember who they beat. But anyway, the AFC divisional game at New England. And that game, the problem was that the reporting eligible has to occur every single play. And so even if you kept the same 11 on the field, you're really changing personnel. And I think the NFL has since changed that rule, and they've changed the reporting rules such that it can allow for defensive substitution. I'm not 100% sure, but there was something, and they tried to get that through. If anyone knows, by the way, in the comment what's been done, toss it out there, and I'll flip it up.
I thought the rule change was that, and maybe I'm misremembering this, but the Patriots were essentially, the designation at that time for ineligible and eligible was the same. And so they were having both the players that were eligible and ineligible make the signal, and then they would snap so then there wasn't a substitution, and then they would snap the ball. I believe the NFL also changed the rule that they only the becoming eligible receiver had to designate themselves in that moment as well. So it took away that extra level of confusion, because two players were essentially doing the same thing, but one to mark eligible and one to mark ineligible.
Right. Okay.
If I'm recalling it correctly, it was a while ago, and I know the rule definitely changed after that season. I know Harbaugh took an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty in that game for complaining about it during the game. Yeah.
So he said he let it get down close where the intentional penalty wasn't going to be as costly, but then he called the refs over and he'd shoot him out, and it was one of these things that Belichick is a master of understanding the nature of the rules. And what I guarantee you happened is officials meet pregame with each team to hear if there are any kind of special plays they want to run that they should be looking out for, and blah, blah, blah. So you inform the officials of what's going on ahead of time. And then they were in the know beforehand on this. I guarantee it. He didn't flip this on them at the time, and they agreed then with that interpretation of the rules, which meant it wasn't going to be changed in game by anything Harbaugh said or did, unfortunately. So the Ravens needed to find a way to adapt to it with the personnel they had at that point. Anyway, frustrating game in New England, certainly for a lot of reasons. That one blowing 2 14-point leads. Let's see. Want to talk about the roughing the passer call otherwise, though, because I thought there were a few things about it. I'm not, I'm normally strong on tight roughing the passer flags. I don't like a lot of them. I think they hurt the game in general. I definitely think they hurt the Ravens over the last few years. Harbaugh always talks about getting his players to understand how they'll call it. Other teams like the Patriots in particular do a much better job both on offense and on defense of understanding how to get the flags called and how to avoid them. And then the other thing is Allen calling from the field, from the ground, really brings back the importance of having a diving flag. So soccer has them. Of course, you get cards for diving at times. And what else has it? The NBA, I think, has embellishment. But the NHL definitely has embellishment. And you can get a 2-minute minor for that. So, why doesn't NHL? Yeah, the NFL needs to have something that penalizes a quarterback for begging for a flag that didn't occur.
The NFL could clean. I'm gonna get up on a soapbox here for a second. So give me 45 seconds here. The NFL could clean this up in a minute by every time an offensive or defensive player turns to a ref and asks for a flag, they take a penalty. They do that for 2 weeks, and all of it will stop. And there is, I think, no place in the game in particular for players to be lobbying during games for flags when the refs are watching what's happening on the field. Now, it's one thing to go to a ref and say, hey, you missed a call. Hey, I think these are the kind of things that are happening. But we saw the most egregious one that I've seen this year was Mac Jones diving to the ground in the game last week when he got pushed. He knew that the Ravens player was touching him, and he literally flopped his way onto the ground. Like those kind of plays have no place in football in particular, and the NFL could clean these up easily and has no interest in it because they want to see offensive football continue to be the driving factor. And so they're going to let Brady and Allen and all these guys beg for flags. And for whatever reason, Lamar Jackson never does it. It is not part of his personality. It is not part of his game. And it's unfortunate only in the sense that it doesn't advantage the Ravens for the number of hits and the number of times he's exposed. He could probably benefit from it a lot more.
Right. I think he actually takes less sacks in the pocket than most of the other statues in the league. And that's one of the things about them is they tend to get hit more in the pocket for hard hits. Jackson takes more where he's trying to convert a pass into a scramble that ends up being behind the line of scrimmage. So that ends up being a sack. And, a lot of those are effectively like run tackles. He's extremely good at taking a hit there. I'm bothered by the thing on this basis, though. Boger was interviewed after the game and said, what I had was forcible contact in the head neck area of the quarterback with the helmet. Asked if he was confident about the head neck contact, Boger replied, yes. Now, I give Boger credit on one point here, is that it appears he didn't watch the replay, because I don't think he'd still be making that claim if he'd watched the replay before he was interviewed. So here's, I guess, the point. I want to hear the officials call out the reason and be more specific about it. Who was the official? African American, was outstanding at detailing what was going on in the play. And I think he's now in some Gene Steratore type role somewhere. But he was just outstanding. He detailed the play. Very smart guy, obviously. And I want that from Jerome Boger. I want him to say, look, forcible contact to the head neck area, that's roughing the passer, number whoever it was, defense, 21 defense. I want to hear that from him so he can't reframe what the reason was after seeing it sometime later. And that could be on the video board. It could be at halftime. It could be at the end of the game before he meets with pool reporters. That didn't happen with Boger in this case. I'm glad it didn't. And his credibility is higher with me for that reason. He stayed with his wrong original call.
And look, I think he deserved, like, I don't know. I don't know that I'm willing to go as far as this, because I do think that there was, if there was ever a game that you told me that the NFL was like shaving and trying to keep this game tight, this game had all the feels of it. It had all the feels of it in terms of how the calls were going, and how they called the game. And it's the one place that, you know, I don't think that there's been a scandal in the NFL in that regard, but it felt like when the game was getting away that the refs were just not going to let that happen. And so I'm not saying that was what was happening. I'm just saying that it felt that way. And in Boger's defense, where I was going originally with this is that, look, sometimes you think you see something that didn't happen. Right. And I'm glad that he was like, yes, I definitively think that's what I saw. And it's, this is not like it's not like one of those, like a libel suit where just because you believe something is to be true, we just want to know what he think he saw. If that's what he thought he saw, he was definitely wrong. He should definitely be docked by the NFL in his evaluations for that. But there's no accountability on the other side of that either, from what we see as fans. There will be no public admonishment by the NFL for this call, and there will be no admonishment of Dawson on the pick play in the end zone for the touchdown at the end of the first half. That was as blatant of a offensive pass interference that I've ever. If that is not offensive pass interference, and what Mark Andrews did
can't get Mark Andrews,
right. Like, and that's what I mean when I say it just felt like they were selectively picking the moments where they wanted to call things because they think they're supposed to be, it's entertainment, right? And they're under a lot of pressure to make sure that these things stay entertaining, that the games are still close in the fourth quarter. And I'm not saying that they intentionally were doing it. But this one felt worse than a lot of bad calls and a lot of bad games that I feel like I've watched.
Truly an awful call. There were two things about the play, by the way, that I thought you could have made the flag for. By the way, Mike Carey is the correct official. That's the one I was thinking of, who did just fantastic explanations of each penalty, of how they were moving the ball, of what's happening with the clock, all that kind of stuff. But he was terrific. Two reasons why I thought it could have been called. And one was, if you look at it, I think he stopped and then took 2 steps forward again to the quarterback after the ball was released. They were small steps because he was very close. But it was 2 small steps, and then he hit him and he took him to the ground. The other would have been a forcible driving into the ground. Now, that was put into roughing the passer originally, I think, so that you can protect quarterbacks from Siragusa/Gannon moments where, a very large man, and obviously all defensive linemen are substantially larger than quarterbacks, falls on a quarterback and rolls over him and gives him all the love of his 300+ pounds. That's certainly not what the NFL wants, and they don't want games played by backup quarterbacks from that perspective. They're not trying to get Brandon Stevens for that kind of a hit. And the thing would have been, if you called it at all, late was the way to go. But I honestly think Boger's explanation of it is wrong, and that probably means he wouldn't have called it for late without a very tight standard in the last couple of minutes. I realize there's a lot going on now too. The Tua situation is so awful, so mishandled inside and outside the NFL, that I have a hard time, really blaming for Boger what happened, or really blaming for officials to be careful about this. But if you want to allow officials to throw the flag, allow them to throw the flag, then have it be reviewable, and have the review also be able to reverse the flag and then get the quarterback for bullshit.
Yeah. Or like cut the flags loose, right? So even if you remember back to the play where Lamar throws the ball to Andrews, who tipped it to Duvernay, probably the most fun play that we're going to see of the entire season. Lamar took a late hit on that one where he got pushed back 2 steps by Miller, and then whoever the other defender was there, like tosses him to the ground, basically in the same way that Allen was tossed to the ground by Stevens. It's like, it's just, I'm fine if you're going to call it, but you've got to call it every single time. And you've got to use it as essentially a stick to stop defenders from coming in, when they're a step away, if they think they're going to throw it. If that's what the league wants, if the league wants to know that defenders are going to have to pull up if they think the quarterback's going to throw the ball, that's fine, right? Like, if those are the rules, those are the rules. The selective application of this, and this has always been the problem with the NFL, that they have some of these rules that are just so blindingly subjective. And they allow them to continue to be blindingly subjective. And it makes it as a fan, it just makes it exceptionally frustrating overall about what are they going to do? How are they going to call this? When, what is right? What isn't right? Like what, all of those kind of things. And so I don't know how the NFL ultimately, can clean them up. They also need to fix the delay of game problem while we're at it, chirping about, sometimes some of the delay of games that we've seen, and even the delay of games I thought in this game haven't been delay of games in other games. And some of them are. And it's just like, there's got to be a better way than the ref looking up and then looking down, and whether the ball is there or whether the ball is not there at their discretion. It's just, it's not functional. And it's, I don't know. It annoys me.
Yeah, I guess we have to move on from this, but there's certainly, we're going to have a pod later in the week where we talk about this play in more detail, about possible solutions as you go forward. I don't want to take too much away from that, but I'll do about 30 minutes on it with another guy I've talked to today about doing it. Let's move on and talk about, let's see, what do we want to talk about next? How about the inability to contain Josh Allen in this game? Because that was a continual and recurring problem, is that the Ravens would rush 4 or sometimes 5. The pocket would lose containment, and they did some things to try and keep rush lanes. We'll get into this on the pass rush, to keep the rush lanes ordered, controlled. Jackson still got away, and he got away during this game on scrambles for RM8, RM9, RM20, RM4. That's actually picking up a fumble and then leaving the pocket. But none of these were designed runs. RL4 to convert 4th and 1, which just hurt like hell because it looked like he was dead to rights in the backfield on 2 different points there. RL11 for the touchdown. That was a really bad backside contain, and an RR7. So, got multiple times here where he gets free of the pocket. At some point, you got to consider a spy.
Yeah, this one's tough because I thought the Ravens pass defense and the general scheme overall in this game was pretty good. I thought McDonald found the right mix of blitzes, the right times to implement them, when to come with extra rushers and when not. And I think that part of the concession, and I think this is what has to happen against teams like that are as good as the Bills, is that you're going to be willing to give something up, right? And so there was a moment where it felt like, at least in the first half, that the Bills were just going to try and stop the running back. They thought the Ravens weren't going to be willing to let Lamar run. Lamar kind of cut them a few times. They made an adjustment, right? So maybe the Ravens do need to make an adjustment. I think that the counter is what happened in the Miami game. You can't let Stephon Diggs get loose. You can't let Gabe Davis get loose. You can't get beat over the top, and you got to make them work for it. And there are going to be opportunities to make Allen fumble the ball, and you're going to make him grind, and you're going to make him, put his body on the line to convert those. And so you're going to take those chances. I don't hate that strategy overall. And point wise overall, it wasn't a huge loss for the Ravens. I think you're on mute, Ken.
It would not be an episode of Film Study without me hitting mute on myself at least once. But anyway, I think I would simplify that a little bit, simplify the question for you a little bit, instead of just why shouldn't they have a spy? It's how much do you think the Ravens pass defense would lose from having either Patrick Queen or Josh Bynes up close to the line of scrimmage as a spy?
I don't think either of them were going to be able to stop Allen as a spy. Like when Owe couldn't stop him off the edge coming free, and he's one of their better tacklers. Patrick Queen was miserable from a tackling perspective and angles in this game, and as he's been in many others. And Josh Bynes looked like he's completely lost a step. I mean, There were one of the scrambles was on. There were 3 deep routes. There were 2 under linebackers, and Allen just and they both had a crack at him. And Allen, that was the long run where it was like I think
Josh
maybe
Bynes,
18. Yeah, and so I don't know that you're going to get a ton of value there as a pickup by giving Allen a better throwing lane. But the weather, I mean, it's impossible to say. Maybe you do need to throw it in there from time to time, or at least make it look like it's going to be a spy to start the play and make an adjustment. The Ravens seem loath to make quick adjustments to game plans in games this year. And I find it completely maddening.
Yeah, they had Oweh as a spy at least once, maybe twice during this game. They dropped him off to coverage. I've got a discrepancy between PFF on number of coverage snaps, and the difference might be spying. So it could be something like that is in there. But anyway, I think they need to try something. And if the point is that neither Bynes nor Queen is fast enough or a good enough tackler to take on Josh Allen, it's going to be worse coming forward a lot of the time, coming downhill from 15 yards off ball. And that happened on one of the plays. I think Allen got 9 or 10 yards on it. And Queen was coming downhill. He did make the tackle in this case, but it's still, the damage is done if Queen is that deep. I think the next question has to be, when are we going to get our safeties into the game on passing downs to replace both inside linebackers? To do it with one pretty consistently, but Geno Stone is withering on the bench, and he is far too good to be, not playing at all here. In fact, there are people who would say he should be playing ahead of Hamilton in some of these cases. But honestly, from a developmental perspective, obviously you want Hamilton to have a great career, and getting him to off to a good start is very important. But I do think there's still room for a Stone or a Tony Jefferson. Earlier this year, I would have thought, to be effectively a third down linebacker and come in there and be a spy. I mean, Tony Jefferson would be perfect in this specific role.
I mean, why wait for third down, Ken?
Yeah, well, good question.
It's not been pretty from inside linebacker this year. I was the one who was upset the year after they had brought Bynes back and let him walk away. I thought he needed to be brought back. I think they were worried he was going to lose a step. I think he's officially lost that step. I think Ross, when he comes back from whatever injury he's got, needs to get a serious look. If I was the Ravens, you've got these, I know you've got a couple guys that are coming back from injuries. They had brought Blake Martinez in. They have got to look for a solution in inside linebacker, because it's not getting it done. And playing Patrick Queen as much as it is, unless they change his role, and they need to narrow his role. And if they can't narrow his role, then they need to get him off the field. I mean, it's as simple as that.
It's not a matter of just narrowing. It's when to get him off the field. And the problem is there isn't any one particular time that Patrick Queen is exceptionally valuable on the field. He had 3 quarterback hits in this game. So he did some things as a pass rusher, but he can't be just a pass rusher. That doesn't work. So if he can be a pass rusher / spy for a mobile quarterback, maybe you can keep him on the field on some second and long, maybe third and long situations, but he's really hurting the team being on there. The lack of recognition is unbelievable still in terms of coverage. So I want to see something better. I think, we're 2 years and 4 games into Patrick Queen's career, and I was really hopeful this would be the turnaround year so far. It has not been so far. The clock, the sands are running low in the hourglass in terms of him having a meaningful career at the Ravens. He's got to really turn it around this year, earn that 5th-year extension, and then he'll be here at least 2 more years, which would be nice if you could really get value, over that period. I think the other side of that is the Ravens got to look at this from a practical standpoint and say, do we really even now want to dump money into a 5th-year extension on Queen and take the risk there? Or do we need to just figure out at this exact point in time, when can he help us most and where can he help us most on the field, and just bring him in specific situations? You've already paid the money. I mean, seriously, if you really just if he's a situational pass rush guy that you want to bring in for 15 snaps a game, I got no problem with that. I really don't. If you think he's a guy who can still help you on first and second down, terrific. Redefine his role into that narrower component. Get him trained on that specific role, layering responsibilities. You need to delayer in terms of Patrick Queen. Just make him responsible for simple things. and hopefully he can pick the things he's good at, pick some things he's good at, do those well, and then not be the burden he has been to date on passing downs.
The nice part is that, and Gabe and I have been talking about. Well, we've been talking a lot about Patrick Queen, but talking a lot about how the evolution of this Ravens team and this year is a little bit inverted to as what we've seen in past years, where there are guys lined up to come back or guys lined up to evolve and grow and become better players. And I think that Hamilton is one of those guys where we saw what he get, like if he's not caught up, what he can't do. And obviously they scaled him back in a hurry. Hamilton's role has been significantly scaled back. Can he be a guy whose role then ultimately gets ramped up? And how does that affect Chuck Clark? When Ross comes back, is he a guy that's going to be able to take on more? There are opportunities where this can still look very different in weeks 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 than it does in weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
For a lot of reasons, this won't play out the way it did in 2019, but it was at this exact moment with 2-2 after an incredibly couple of disappointing defensive games. In fact, 4 really disappointing defensive weeks to start the season, that the Ravens completely rebuilt their defense on the fly. And it started at that inside linebacker position with LJ Fort, who's been mentioned here by some of the people here, and the acquisition of Josh Bynes that time around, the second tour of duty. And those two immediately had an enormous impact in replacing Owasso and eventually Kenny Young, who was traded a little bit later in that season for Marcus Peters. And then also they got 2 nose tackles. So that defense was rebuilt on the fly. Unfortunately, this Ravens team can't do that due to the current salary cap considerations. They have no money to move around even, let alone what the current cap is, because they probably have $2-3 million in cap currently. But somebody can fact check that, by the way. I'm really appreciating how quickly you guys fact check me on this. I'm going to rely on you a little bit. Somebody go out to OTC and find out how much cap the Ravens currently have. But the real problem isn't the current cap. It's the amount of cap flexibility they have in turning, making extensions even, but definitely in terms of pushing bonus forward in years. So they just don't have any flexibility to go out there and get even like 3 or 4, say, vet min contracts that they think could really help them at this point.
But the alternate is that Justin Houston will come back and play at some point. Tyus Bowser is on his way back. Owe hopefully then will have more snaps where doesn't have to be the spy guy, or they can keep these guys a little bit better rested. Jason Pierre-Paul played fantastic for coming off of, and there were a few moments where it seemed like he didn't completely know what was going on and he needs to get caught up. I think he was the 12th guy on the field on the 12 man on the field penalty. So for a team that hasn't been penalized a ton so far this year, I think that I'd be willing to cut him a little bit of slack on that play. He played a ton in this game, and I thought he played quite well for a guy that hasn't, that's coming off some injuries and hasn't played at all this year.
I'm going to try and avoid the conditional statement there. Unless you're trying to say, I think he is in a good spot for ramping up to where he can be, I could agree with that. I didn't think he had a particularly strong game. It was okay, but 1.5 pressures and I think it was 35 pass rush snaps doesn't do it for me. So from that perspective, I couldn't really say he had a great game. I'm not really big on the 12 man penalty, because I also think that might have been Hamilton on that play. There were 2 players it could have been on, but Pierre-Paul came off the field, then he went back on the field again before that next play was run. So I'm not 100% sure who was at fault there, and I intentionally didn't write about it in my article because of exactly that fact. But it was either him or Hamilton appeared to be the guy who had it wrong.
And Ajabo, sorry. And Ajabo is another guy that could come in and contribute. So there are, we talked about Stone getting a bigger role, Ross coming off the IR, Hamilton, growing and developing. So there are some in-house opportunities that didn't exist in 2019 on this team. Whether those manifest themselves to be actually productive remains to be seen.
Yeah, real good point. So in offense, it's Stanley. It's getting back Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards apparently is going to start practicing pretty soon here. Stanley might be back next week or 2. I was hoping for this game, but the next week or 2 it might be realistic given what we're hearing. And then with the one of the things that really bothers me about the Stanley situation is Harbaugh's non-committal language. This thing, he kind of had his trail off voice going on, but he said, and Ronnie will continue his progression. Okay, I think like this. It's like I don't want to read in exactly what Harbaugh is feeling about that, but it's not a cheerleader kind of injury comment like we typically get from John, and that worries me in this particular case. Now he's probably touched the stove a few too many times with Ronnie Stanley to figure out what's going on, or to try and project that he'll be back sooner than he really is. But yeah, I don't like the way it was done. Charlie Kolar apparently is not ready to practice yet, and I thought he would be lost for the bulk of the season, giving the sports hernia surgery he has. I know you always get aggressive, 8-week estimates and whatnot, but he's probably, much further away from that would be my guess. Gus Edwards, we don't know if he's going to be really ready in 3 weeks, but I believe is a limitation on PUP that he can't practice for more than that before being activated to 53. So the Ravens may have a spot for a walking wounded, or they may not at that point. And it'll be interesting to see how they handle Edwards.
Well, I mean, it certainly feels like they've got a spot for walking wounded, given Mike Davis took, as you indicated, 2 snaps. Nick Boyle active and not playing snaps on offense. So, at least for right now, there's space for these guys to come back and there to be opportunities on both sides of the ball.
All right, we have our answer here. Thanks, Matthew. Lots of great stuff out there from him already in this short pod. But JPP after JPP is still $3.3 million on the cap. When you think about how that's spent, that's really only about 3.5 vet min contracts that you're talking about. You can get guys who were earlier in terms of years service, and you can start scouring the R's and the ones to get players who are cheaper than that. But that's just not a lot of cap space. And the guys the Ravens are going to want are guys that can help them immediately. So it might be a special teams player. It might be an inside linebacker who's willing to play for vet minimum. Obviously, with JPP, they got a guy who they deferred a bunch of cost into next year, and they can't do that every time either. They can't have a bunch of NLTBE bonuses that really don't make sense.
Well, if he's not racking up the sacks, then they'll be okay on NLTBE for Pierre Paul.
All right. So let's see. Let's get moving on here. We're taking a long time. I appreciate this because I'm really enjoying all these comments from you folks. This live show really makes a big difference for us. Let's go ahead and talk packages since I think we're basically through with a lot of this other stuff that I wanted to make sure we hit on. I got one more thing. The weather, huge role in this game on both sides. Lamar had a hard time getting off good passes on the offensive side. But let's not forget the Bills also, who generally I think benefit from poor weather. They certainly play in it a lot in Buffalo. High wind, and Allen is thought to be a fairly wind-resistant quarterback, the way Joe Flacco was. But in terms of the drops for Buffalo, they had 6 drops as I counted on it, where the ball went right through the hands of the receiver, and that's an incredible number for however many passes Allen threw in this game.
So and half of them were to running backs and weren't terribly challenging throws to catch. So I mean, it speaks to how wet the ball must have been, and how hard it was to catch the ball. And it certainly looked like it was affecting Lamar. It certainly was affecting the Ravens receivers, particularly Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, that's a good point. 36 total passes thrown there by Allen in the game.
That's a low number for him.
Yeah, that is a low number for him. So having 1/6 of your passes dropped is going to lower your completion percentage somewhat. And you're right, a bunch of little swing passes to running backs that didn't get caught. And most notably, that huge mix up at the goal line with Hamilton on the play to Diggs. Diggs is wide open for the touchdown. They did end up scoring anyway, but let's speak about that for just a minute. Obviously, Hamilton messing up again is not a good thing. I do feel good about the way the leadership in the secondary is. Now, that may seem like a funny comment to make up the Baltimore Ravens this right now, but they've got some good players in the secondary who know what they're doing. And Peters, Humphrey, and Marcus Williams are all leaders. Marcus Williams probably did the best job leading on that play, came in low 5, talked to him. So obviously discussion going on. It's not animated. It's not where Marcus Peters is going to cock his head, or Humphrey might do the same in terms of a heavy emotional kind of response to a very bad play. But it maintained the accountability and tried to keep him informed. Hopefully Hamilton is a guy who Williams can take under his wing and really tell him what he knows about having to read keys in the NFL at free safety or just on the back end in general. They have Chuck Clark. Chuck Clark's a fine leader in terms of relaying the call and whatnot. This team is well set for leaders in the secondary to not break down. They've got one rookie, plus maybe another slot corner who doesn't always know where he's supposed to be on a play. And that has caused some problems. I won't even pick on the slot corner. I think plus the inside linebackers who have trouble, making an impact on plays between level 2 and 3.
There was a comment that I heard during the Rams Buffalo game to start the year, and whoever their sideline reporter had done an interview with McDermott and Ed Frazier from Buffalo's defense. And they talked, apparently he was talking about how the defense is very good at understanding what structurally a play call is supposed to do, where the weaknesses are in that play call, and leaning towards the weaknesses of that play. So knowing that they have strengths in other areas, knowing that if like Matt Stafford sees X, that he's probably going to be trying to attack Y, and that making sure that they bend a little bit more towards kind of whatever that factor is. But it just feels like that's the missing ingredient right now for the Ravens, because the Ravens have a very stars and scrubs action going on in what's happening with defense. Marcus Williams, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Justin Madubuike have played, and Calais Campbell probably better, but not great. But those 4 guys that I named before that have played exceptional this season. And you would think when you have 4 guys on defense that are playing at that high of a level, and obviously Peters missed the first game and was kind of getting wound up first 2 games and wound up as he kind of got back in. But when that's the baseline, you should be able to protect guys like Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes. You should be able to know that they're going to be doing these things, that they're able to kind of lean and adjust and make those things happen. I don't think that there's anything unique about McDermott and Frazier and what Buffalo is trying to do in that sense. And that those things, in the same way that you think that they can get cleaned up, I agree. That the Ravens can figure out where their strengths are, what they don't need to help and protect on, and where they can narrow that down and start to play a little bit more collectively as a defense.
What do you think about this comment from Jimmy Dean? This is a good one. The good thing about Hamilton is he has the right mental makeup, in my opinion, to make the correction without being hurt. I'm going to say something first, and I really want to hear what you have to say about this. Is we project a lot onto Kyle Hamilton as a first-round draft pick in terms of the reputation he had. The instincts were terrific, and I think we've seen them in the preseason. I think we've seen instincts live at the NFL level. What I have a problem with is projecting intelligence onto a player. Even if he speaks well, even if he does, it's not exactly the same as having, a high football IQ. And he's just been out of position several times in a way that's telling me he just has not picked up the playbook. And it might be complicated, but the touchdown pass to Hill in week 2 was a bad example of him really being out of position on the 60-yarder down the left sideline. The fact that Marcus Williams shows up he showed up next to Marcus Williams by the line of scrimmage. I'm pretty sure Marcus Williams was where he was supposed to be. And then Marcus Williams bailed out directly and diagonally towards Hamilton's responsibility. It's a nice thing for the defense to have a player like that who could fill the hole, but it's really not good. One player can severely disadvantage your defense if they're not in the right position at safety.
Yeah. My response to your comment is that most of the time when we hire people, we hire the people that are good at interviews and not the things that we're trying to hire them to do. And I think that, it does seem like Hamilton has the right mentality and is willing to push through some of this, but I don't know. I'm a little worried about Kyle Hamilton. I would expect him to be a little bit more caught up by now. I would expect the athleticism that we've heard all about to pop a little bit more on tape from time to time. We've seen it a couple times, but even in the preseason, there were moments where he was in the area, he was getting to the area, but he wasn't quite, the guy that's going to separate and become the star is the guy that's already in the area. And they're doing that even as a rookie. And so I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I want to give him some time to adjust. But I think that he probably can't be labeled as a top 5 draft pick quality player right now in terms of what you should expect from him at any point in this year.
I think that's entirely fair. Obviously, we have enough evidence, I think, in very limited games. He has not won a starting role. He hasn't forced his way into the lineup in that regard. It is good that they're getting him playing time, but Tyler Linderbaum has had a bigger impact, obviously, on the Baltimore Ravens than he has. And
not so great in this game either, though. Linderbaum struggled in this game.
I haven't done the offensive line scoring yet. I'm going to do that right after we get off the air here with my wife. And I hate making comments about it beforehand because it just gives you a chance to be whipsawed. But he did have the 3 penalties. It's very hard to recover from that. I'll just say that in terms of what his score might be for this week. We're getting obviously a great comment here from Chris, but he's telling me go onto the package comments and let's talk about that. The Ravens used the base defense 3 times in this game, and they gave up only 14 yards on it, which doesn't seem bad, except it was a converted 4th and 1. So the Bills put in a 6-man offensive line. The Ravens reacted to it with a basic 3-4 look and 2 inside linebackers, 2 outside linebackers. Harrison was one of them. Obviously, it doesn't give you probably their best chance to stop the run in that case. But they converted that, and then they had the last 2 plays that they ran in anger were an 8-yard run and then by Singletary where he flopped to the ground. Then Oweh tackled him. And then they had the 2-yard run by Allen where they weren't going to drag Allen into the end zone either. So they were all pretty substantial losses for the defense, all 3 of those plays. Even though it was only 14 yards, don't be fooled. They really didn't get the job done in base defense.
Yeah, I don't need to see the Ravens play much in base defense with for much of the rest of the year. I think they should get creative in terms of those packages. I don't think that's their optimal lineup of players for this defense.
One of the things is that your opponent chooses it for you a lot. So if the opponent's playing 22, you pretty much have to be in base. If they're playing 21 or 12, if they play 21, you're probably in base. If they play 12, you might be in big nickel, say, where Hamilton, is a good option. So I think they'll get creative once Hamilton proves he can really play and contribute to the defense. But
that could be Geno Stone too. I mean, let's not discount the fact that you can move Clark into the box and you still got another safety. So, Hamilton's, as you mentioned earlier, development is great, but you still got a player that I think a lot of us trust as kind of like the deep free safety guy. So even if you want to move Marcus Williams up, there's another guy on the roster. It's not just Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah, good point. So, I mean, you'd end up with Clark and Stone in the box if you want to go with a 4 safety look and really maximize your coverage in those short zone areas and whatnot. I would, I'm on board with that. I believe in platoon inside linebacker play very thoroughly. I put out a tweet this week about all the positions I think could be first round picks for the Ravens in 2023, and it's a scary number again. I mean, the Ravens aren't going into it saying we need a left tackle, which has its own challenges, of course, because you don't know if you're going to get a left tackle at the spot you're at. But, left tackle, cornerback, edge, inside linebacker. There's a 5th one, but those are the ones I can remember right now are all wide receiver, all necessary positions for the Ravens to improve at. The defensive line, they're kind of old still. They still need to get younger there, but they're probably going to have to address that position in later rounds. It's really scary that they have so many positions of need a year, after a couple of years, frankly, of pretty good drafts. The 18 draft, they only have the 2 players remaining, only Andrews and Jackson remain from that. But they also have a lot of value from that draft that has since been harvested. So they have I think Matabike might have been the pick they got. No, it wasn't. That's not right. Who was the pick they got in exchange? The Hurst pick. I think ended up being number 55. It's Dobbins, right? Dobbins.
Oh yeah, Dobbins.
So Dobbins is essentially an 18 draftee, if you want to call that. And so they have other players that they've gained with the draft capital they've harvested. Oweh was in exchange for Brown. So it's not like they have nothing left from that draft, but they had to unpack a lot of it. Peters is on the team because of the trade of Kenny Young. So they've got guys, but it's sad that Zach Sealer and others got away from that great draft. And there's I don't know if there's a natural cyclical nature of the draft. Maybe it is because of your position in the standings, but you can't be right every single time. And they essentially the same management has been making these draft picks since the very beginning. And I'm not talking about who has the final decision on pulling the trigger between the DaCosta and Ozzie eras, because I don't really think it's that different. Occasionally there might be a player, probably on a later round, where it's not more or less a consensus call. But I think most of the early round decisions, Ozzie's still right there next to DaCosta in the draft room. And DaCosta was next to Ozzie in the draft room for all the years before. It's one of the things about the Ravens that you can really point to and say they've always had a consistent kind of a draft approach and a way of reaching consensus on players.
Yeah, definitely. And they have when you swing and miss on guys like Patrick Queen, though, that's where it ends up hurting. And I think the Ravens have made up a lot of their draft capital kind of inequities because they, with those later picks, they're a little bit safer. That you're not taking a guy that's going to be a complete nothing burger. And when Patrick Queen is that first round pick, and he is, for whatever you wanted to think about CJ Mosley, right? Like some people loved him, some people did not love him, but he provided value for where his draft pick was. Right?
Yeah.
You're getting the complete opposite of that with guys like Patrick Queen, and the suck of what that creates on the rest of the defense and the holes that creates kind of across the board is part of the problem.
Oh, it's people don't, I think, often get just how big a percentage of your total draft capital your first round pick typically is. I mean, if you don't have your 2, it can be like 60% or more of your draft capital. It's probably, it depends on where you draft in the first round, obviously, but it can be 50% of your capital. It can be a lot more if you're drafting number 1 overall. And it's just a, it's a huge, it's like you have a couple of $1 chips and a couple of $5 chips and one $25 chip and one $100 chip, and those are the wagers you get to make, and you can't get change in this particular metaphor. So you have to bet the whole thing. And let me continue on here because I want to make sure we have a chance to get to the whole show here tonight. Standard nickel used 40 times in this game. Buffalo lined up in 11 personnel pretty much the entire game. They made it really easy on the Ravens to choose their package. They chose it for them when they line up in 11, which means 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers, 2 defensive linemen, and 5 defensive backs, 3 of whom are corners because they're always putting 3 wide receivers on the field. So it's called forcing the nickel for a reason, and it certainly did in this game. 40 plays, 224 yards, 5.6 yards per play. This was a game where I still am not comfortable with the Ravens' ability to cover against 11 personnel. Where do you come out from that?
I'm a lot more confident after this game. I thought Brandon Stephens played particularly well and had himself a pretty nice game. And I think that as long as the Ravens continue to, they can find a guy that fits in terms of what they're trying to do and intermingle what they're trying to do with coverages and safeties on that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And so if Brandon Stephens is the guy, great. If, Pepe is the guy, great. But, I was encouraged by Stephens' game, which makes me encouraged by their ability to play nickel.
Okay, so Stephens picked up 2 more penalties in this game. One of them we've talked about already in terms of the roughing the passer. Had another defensive hold. I haven't been happy with the grabbiness. I was actually a little surprised that they didn't stay with Pepe. Now, going back to last game, Jalen Armour-Davis was in the game not as the slot corner, but he was an outside corner. He left after 9 snaps, 2 big plays during that time. Obviously, that wasn't good. Then they brought in Stephens, and he lasted a half. In fact, he lasted exactly through the first drive of the second half. I'm not sure if there might have been some quad injury there, but he left and had given up 2 big plays as well. So it might have been a combination of injury and effectiveness. I don't want to really get into that. But Pepe Williams came on. I think he outplayed both of them. And with Buffalo, they presented the Ravens with 2 smaller slot receivers. Isaiah McKenzie got hurt during the game. Crowder was out there and he played most of the game. And those guys are 5'9" and under, both of them. And it seems like if you're going to play Pepe Williams, my God, get him in a game like this.
Yeah, it seems like what the Ravens are doing, and my instinct on it was that, Stephens is the first man up, and if he's not doing well, they're going to make the switch, and Pepe's going to get his shot. And I thought Stephens played well enough not to cede his position in this game, and the Ravens weren't getting burned out of the slot. And I didn't feel like they were getting burned, in the same way that Armour-Davis was when he was being targeted in the New England game, et cetera. And so if the outcome that we had in this game and the drop passes weren't usually in front of Stephens, they were in some other places, I thought, if that's the type of performance we're going to get against the slot, I'm going to be happy with it. But, I'll leave that to kind of Ravens coaches to decide.
All right. Maybe we talk about Stephens a little later here in the show because I think there's some things to say and we can do that. Ravens played 1 snap of rush nickel. I don't even know what to call this package because the Ravens now have blurred the line between outside linebacker and inside linebacker with 2 players, with Harrison and now Del'Shawn Phillips. Del'Shawn Phillips wins the Dan Cody Award. I'll tell you what that is in just a moment, by coming on and having the one play he's on for be a sack, -12 for Owe. So They also had Harrison on the play, Pierre-Paul and Queens. They had total five linebackers on the play, just one defensive lineman. First time they've run that this season, and the first snap, obviously, for Delshon Phillips for the year. Dan Cody had, I'm going to get this right, something like 14 snaps for minus 22 yards in his Ravens career. And a second-round draft pick, that's not what you want. But in that 2006 season, he came in and he played against the Atlanta Falcons, and he looked really good. They played him all over the place. They played him at nose tackle on a third down in Rex Ryan's defense. They played him on both edges. They played him standing up, and he contained well against Michael Vick, did a really good job. And he was on the field for, I think, 3 sacks during his plays that way. The next week, he got one play against Pittsburgh, and then he got hurt, and he never returned to the NFL. So that was pretty much his whole career was in that. But Delshon Phillips, I think it's probably a good thing if he's not on the field. But for whatever reason, they decided they'd put him in for this play. And it's nice to see him actually flop on top of the downed quarterback and not draw a penalty for it after Oweh had the sack.
Yeah, it's I am interested to see where the direction of the Ravens' creativity is going to head in terms of this offense. And, we're seeing a ton of Oweh, the edge guys. So Oweh and Pierre-Paul in this game just playing a lot. And then that can't stand. And so it'll be interesting to see if the Ravens continue to try and get creative with what these packages end up looking like.
All right, we're going to come back and do part 2 of the show, but I want to address this question before we do. How much of my discomfort is due to the lack of a pass rush? So I'm saying I'm not real comfortable with the Ravens lining up against 11. I think that's a fair question, Brad. I think it's probably about even. I'm not comfortable with who the Ravens have at slot corner. I'm not comfortable with Peters' ability to gamble as much with not having pass rush. Obviously, Peters, the master of understanding how the play call relates to his ability to jump a route. By the way, Peters had a real nice route jump attempt in this game where it almost looked like he impacted the receiver early. But what it really was is they're both going for the football in the same spot. You notice that?
Was that the first play? That was the first play of the game. Yeah. I thought he had picked it when I watched it. When it was happening live, I thought he had it.
Yeah, well, exciting. It's good to see him playing as well as he has so far. And I don't know where you are on this, but would you extend Peters at this point?
I would absolutely, without unequivocally, extend Peters. And if that was the thing that it took to add an impact player via trade or some kind of signing or whatever that looked like, that I wouldn't hesitate for even half a second to kind of make that decision. But my discomfort with this defense remains the pass rush. Mm-hmm. It doesn't. It's non-existent. And like I said, I mentioned it earlier. I thought McDonald did a good job of finding opportunities to create pressure from external situations and look a little more. We gotta kind of in Jason from Huddle It Up Films a half wink in this game for McDonald. I think a little bit. But in that sense, the pass rush has got to get better in certain situations with 4 guys. I think there's reinforcements coming. I think it's going to make everybody look better. And in particular, help the Ravens kind of air a little bit of extra help to the slot when they're able to generate that rush.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Just lots of opportunities for that to work. And maybe they really do. They're an odd team in that they have options at safety in particular to come up and do some things with coverage on the slot, to rush the slot, to rush Hamilton as well, if they want to. Hamilton's a player kind of like Patrick Queen, came in with the reputation as a pass rusher anyway. If he's really messing up on the back end, getting up close to the line of scrimmage, lining up on the slot, or lining up even on a tight end on the edge is a great place to let him try and contribute. Just make a play. Obviously, he's got speed, instincts, seems to pretty much understand where the football is. I'm not trying to decide where he needs to be, but where the football is. And that's an important skill that I think he could probably use well. He could be your cleanup guy on some sacks. If you get pressure from another place, he could be the guy who gets there and gets the club first. So I'd like to see him used in some creative ways.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right, let's see. We'll come back to the second half in just a minute. Before we do, Jordan, please tell people where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you guys can find me at Raven Sit Room on Twitter, and I'm part of the Situation Room, a podcast that I do with Gabe Ferguson. He's at Gabe Fergie, where we try and break down the games, talk a little bit about the strategy and play calls that we're seeing on offense and defense and how that's affecting the game.
All right, outstanding. We'll be back in just a minute for the second half of the show. Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for the second half of our discussion with Jordan Coe on the defense. And we had a long discussion in this first half with some great comments on the live feed here, which we really appreciate. And we want to continue this. And I'm going to try and do at least one such show per week, given how high quality the discussion is here online. But Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Glad to be here. Always fun to talk Ravens. Even not as much fun after a loss, but still glad to be here.
There you go. Jordan Coe, the Situation Room. He's at Ravens Sit Room on Twitter. Make sure you look on filmstudybaltimore.com for his show with Gabe Ferguson, the Ravens Situation Room. That's Gabe Ferguson is at Gabe Fergie. Also a fairly frequent guest of this show. And two of the people I just like talking football with almost as much as any other. So really appreciate you guys and your availability for the show, in particular, your ability to fill in late on this particular episode.
Always happy to help, Ken.
All right. Outstanding. We didn't get to the pass rush in the first half of the show. So let's talk about that a little bit. And, you mentioned your general frustration with the pass rush.
Yeah, I can't quite figure out what happened from week one in the Jets game when it felt like the Ravens could rush 4 and they were generating pressure and they were getting home. It couldn't just be the Jets have some decent pieces, especially on the interior of their offensive line. They're not great all across the board, but it just felt like there were times the guys were winning one-on-one on the regular, and it wasn't just one guy. And it feels like right now the only guy that's consistently winning one-on-one in pass rush situations is Madubuike. And the Ravens need somebody else to be able to step up in that regard, to either to be closing, pushing the pocket, to be winning on the edge. Doesn't have to be the same guy every time, but there are too many plays with ample time and space. And you saw that Mac Jones had a few moments where he was just kind of ripping them apart because he had no pressure on him at all.
That was a little bit, that was by design, but I agree with you entirely that they were allowing him to make unforced errors into 7-man coverage. Which I thought was a very effective, play against him. The weather actually allowed the Ravens to create some unforced errors in this game. As we mentioned, a little bit of the drop balls. There were 6 of those in this game. That did create some additional value for, not rushing the passer. But I think the Ravens were fairly effective when they did. Interesting point here in terms of who the Ravens designed their pass rush around, with Houston and Pierce being such significant factors, both of them getting hurt. And then, have the Ravens relied too much? I'll add another name. Calais Campbell remains one of the Ravens' most effective pressure guys. With those 3 guys, how badly do the Ravens need to get younger on the defensive line and an outside linebacker?
They definitely need to get younger. But if you look at outside linebacker, a core moving forward of Owe, Bowser, and Ajabo is a really nice, solid rotation of outside linebackers. And if Ajabo is who you thought he was going to be before the injury, and I always like to think about it as, what if the Ravens have taken him with their first pick and he had tore his Achilles at the very first training activity that he was doing for the Ravens, as opposed to doing it while he was doing the pro day and working out, right? I think that your interpretation of what you would expect from Ajabo would be pretty high. He would be a high draft pick in that instance. A lot of people had him valued, thought he would go in the 10 to 15 range. You see this kind of rise of outside pass rushers that can win on the edge, getting drafted higher than you might think that they would because of the impact that they have on the game. So Owe, Ajabo, and Bowser, that's a nice group of guys. And I think Broderick Washington's a little bit underrated overall by the Ravens. Obviously, he's getting a little bit more aged in terms of what his contract looks like for this team, but he's not an older guy. Travis Jones is a guy that we've seen have an opportunity to make a difference. Madubuike is a good guy. That's 6 solid guys that are all relatively young. So yes, an infusion of young talent would be helpful. Yes, it would be good to see veterans come in and not get hurt. This is also the NFL. And if there's any way to predict that, if any team has figured out how to predict that, then they are making hay on it. And I have heard other people talk about how the Rams think that they've figured something out from an injury perspective. And if you think about the way they build their teams, and in particular using the stars and scrubs, or the 2 or 3 or 4 really top end players, and then letting everything else play its way out, you get burned by injuries when you're that kind of team, right? If those guys get hurt, or even the next guys up get hurt. And the Rams have found a way, whether it's luck or whether it's not, to avoid some of that. It's hard to say, whether it's luck or whether it's just, bad training, reliance on old guys. I don't know. I'm not an anatomy guy. I don't know enough about the human body to have kind of a comment over how to do it better.
Yeah, I've we've had some people on the show who've had some really interesting thoughts about how to deal with this, including some heat-related guys who work with South American soccer teams in Brazil that were interesting, to say the least, in terms of the guests that really understand kind of what's going on with injuries. Some of the things in football don't allow for that to be tracked in exactly the same way. So you'd have to literally have players drop their drawers in a room to have pictures taken before and after practice, kind of thing, to see how relative heat deltas is how I kind of understand it. But they're what they can do. They apparently have new analytics. They're giving players. I don't know what they're giving you exactly, whether it's heart rate or whether it's any of it is musculoskeletal, which I think is where the real gains are necessary. I think that's where you're going to get a lot of that value. But whatever they're giving players, hopefully it's about heart rate or things like that. Hopefully that's something they can take of value from the practice. But I agree, it'd be like having an interest rate machine that could generate a value in terms of the guy who brings that to the NFL is going to do more for the NFL than the analytics people have even when they figure that out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the pass rush again. For the game, Allen had ATS on 13 of 37 dropbacks. That's ample time and space. That's a 3-second pocket that either did happen or would have happened, in my opinion, would have held up. 35%, that's pretty high. He also had 11 ball out quick instances. That's 65% of the time he got it off, without there being pressure. And then there were 13 other pressure events. Here's where it gets weird. With ample time and space, Allen was 4 of 13 in this game for 51 yards, and he had the interception to Humphrey. That was an ample time and space play on the very first play of the game, or first drive of the game. 3.9 yards per play when he gets all day to throw.
Yeah, there was a bit of, the commentary about Josh Allen after the Miami game that kind of fell into this bucket, which was that in the first half, Miami threw blitzes at him. They were throwing him deceptive looks. And then in the second half, they pulled that back. They didn't pull back in terms of what they showed him, but they pulled back in terms of the coverage and what they put behind that. And that he ended up being a lot more indecisive, a lot less, depth of target in terms of how deep he was throwing the ball, more hesitant about what that seemed to happen. I wonder if some of that is the same, where the Ravens in those instances dropping a lot of guys back, making coverages a little bit more complex, forcing him to either throw the ball against Peters and Humphrey or wherever Williams was for protection, and in those instances, then it's easy to lean on the guys and into the areas where that extra help is going to be, and whether that was part of it. And then also, the first 2 throws of the game for him, right? One at Peters, one at Humphrey, almost interception, and then followed up by interception.
Tip ball. Yeah.
The next throw was at Marcus Williams. He almost picked that ball, on that deep safety coverage. So maybe Josh Allen was a little like there was a half a second of hesitancy. You throw the weather in on top of that, and that can mess up your game.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but the point you made about all of the Ravens' key eyes in the backfield players, and when we're talking about Humphrey Peters and Marcus Williams, getting their hands on the football within short order in this game was very impressive. I really thought Williams should have had the pick. I don't think it was touched underneath. I believe it was touched at the line of scrimmage. Might have been by Madubuike, because I know why I thought that. Marcus Williams didn't get credited with a pass defense, and Patrick Queen didn't either, by the way. But Patrick, in the case of Marcus Williams, I actually don't think it was touched by the receiver. And maybe if it's touched by the receiver and then the defender, it doesn't count as a pass defense. But I don't think it was touched by the receiver. I think Williams just kind of let it go through his hands. In the case of Queen's missed interception, Madubuike touched the ball at the line of scrimmage, so he gets the PD. And Queen didn't get it, which was, it is what it is. It's probably fair given, what happened on the play, but kind of unfortunate, obviously, that Patrick couldn't collect that. Going on real quickly, ball out quick. Allen was 7 of 11 for 70 yards, 6.4 yards per play. When pressured, this is exceptionally good. He was 8 of 12 for 80 yards, including the sack for -12, so 80 net yards, 6.7 yards per play. So that's what I call an inverted game. It doesn't happen very often. Probably happens maybe one game in 10 at the most, where a quarterback actually throws better under pressure than he does with ample time and space. But interesting game from that perspective.
My guess is, and I don't have your chart in front of me, but my guess is the drops probably had a ton to do with that, because I can think of 3 swing passes to running backs that were going to be massive gains, and all of them just drop, heartbreaking drops.
Oh yeah, it makes us stand up and cheer. But yes,
yeah,
heartbreaking
for Josh Allen and for the other team. Obviously, I'm not. I've not switched allegiances.
So there's some interesting stuff by numbers in terms of the pass rush in this game. When they rush 3, 1 play, 0 yards. When they rush 4, 24 plays, 145 yards, 6.0. You'll notice nothing is really a chart-topping number here. Ravens didn't get beat for 10 or 12 or 14 yards per play on any type of package. And they also didn't have anything where they gave up 2 yards a play. When they rush 5, 10 plays, 40 yards, 4.0 yards per play, 1 sack, 1 turnover. They only rushed 6 twice in this game. That's been one of the things of the McDonald stint so far, is very few 6-man rushes, 2 plays, 16 yards, 8.0 yards per play. The blitz numbers, how most people define blitzes, which is a 5+ man rush. I don't really define it that way, but it doesn't matter how I define it. The 5+ man rush are not that much lower than what Wink does. Where McDonald has probably done less is in the numbers that are over 5. The number of times he rushes 6 or 7. And we saw that a lot more from Wink than we have here. A lot more cover 0 risk he's willing to take. And obviously, some of that's personnel driven. When you have a great free safety, you don't want to take cover 0 risk. You want to take cover 1 risk.
Yeah, I mean, and while the Ravens did some cover 0 unintentionally in the Miami game from time to time. But yeah, I agree. And I think that's the right strategy. And quite frankly, I think that that's an evolution of the NFL overall. It's actually kind of difficult to be critical of Wink, given what's happening for the Giants and the effectiveness that their team has had on balance for the year. I think some of that is schedule and some of that is NFC not being at the same level as the AFC is. But it's challenging to be critical of that, but you're just seeing a lot more of making sure that there's 2 over the top. You're not going to let any of these quarterbacks, whether they are Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson, beat you over the top. But at the same time, you're going to try and keep that in front of you. That is just where the game is headed. And teams are, I think that's part of the adjustment of what we're seeing for the Ravens now.
This is interesting because I don't know what McKinney has done so far this year. I haven't looked up on PFF, but I was guessing that he would probably have a better season with Wink and the ways in which he might craft a pass rush to create opportunities for him. And you say that's silly, but no, it's the relationship between your pass rush and how your corners play, your pass rush, and how your pass defense is they're very tightly linked. It's like pitching and defense. Pitching and fielding, we'll call it in baseball. They're so closely linked in terms of it's you can continually take apart the separations and you still won't completely peel the onion in terms of what there is there. So I do need to look up what McKinney has done so far. If anyone wants to go out there and kind of summarize that for me, I'd love to hear it and see it in the comments here. A little bit more. They had 37 pass plays for the game, 201 yards, 5.4 yards per play, 1 sack, 1 turnover. You win that game normally if you hold Josh Allen to 5.4 yards per play. But unfortunately, the Ravens were playing in that same reign and had their numbers muted as well.
Yeah, it's pretty disappointing that the defense performed as well as they did in this game. Whether assisted by the weather. Whether it was assisted by the weather or not, you want to win these performances.
Yeah, that was like a likely moment you just had. Right?
It was.
Run into those every so often. Get a little bit onto the elements of deception in this game. So one thing that Wink used a lot of individual blitzes. McDonald used 15 in this game. That's 0.41 per pass play from off the line of scrimmage. That was spread across 11 plays. So they had 4 pairings, 4 2-man blitzes. That was the only thing they ran in terms of deceptive pass rushes the entire game. Get to that in a little bit here in a second. But Allen completed 4 of 11 for 43 yards on those blitz plays. That really seemed like the Ravens could have done more to drop linemen, drop Oweh if you need to, drop Jason Pierre-Paul if you need to into a short zone coverage and bring somebody else. That seemed to do more against that Bills pass blocking scheme than what they were able to accomplish with their straight 4-man rush.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, and when we were talking in part one briefly, I thought the blitz packages were rather effective. That you get that effect of seeing the free rusher, and like even in this Stevens roughing the passer call, in those instances, he was completely free to the quarterback. There were a couple different moments where we talked poorly about Patrick Queen, so I'll say something really nice about Patrick Queen now. His pass rushes were fantastic, and he put the wood to Josh Allen a couple times when he got in there on those quarterback hits too, which is always nice to see, and he did so cleanly. Those are generated, blitz packages by Mike Macdonald, and the balance of, whether the Ravens decide they need to get more aggressive about that or not, I'm willing to kind of, wait and see, and let's see if they get there. Let's see what happens when Bowser gets back. Let's see what happens when Ajabo gets back. I think they would prefer every team would prefer to be able to get there without having to have that deception. But it's nice to see that they've got that in the bag when they need to go to it. And I think that if this was maybe a playoff game, perhaps the evolution of what they're willing to do shifts a little bit more quickly in the game.
I think I like always when you can unbalance the defense in some way if you don't lose too much for it. And in this game, you have the use of a spy. So you're not even asking someone to take a coverage responsibility. You can ask Owe to drop off the line of scrimmage and spy, or maybe even Jason Pierre-Paul. I mean, he's an aware player. He might not have the speed to get to Josh Allen, but if he's a couple of yards downfield, he's going to have a better chance to take the right angle to get him. I think it would make sense. Pass rushers generally have a really good idea of what the best angle is to the quarterback. So, you've got a pretty good chance, I think, to make that work. And then you got somebody else who you might get a run free on. They did blitz. When they blitzed, they weren't using big coverage assets to do it. They used Stevens twice off the slot. That's about as much as it was. They used Clark once. And then all the rest were inside linebacker blitzes. So, when you do that, whether it's Harrison or Queen or Bynes, you're not giving up a ton in coverage.
Well, and the re-addition of Bowser, whenever he ultimately gets healthy, is going to be huge because he is a guy that you can use not just to be a spy, but to give meaningful spatial zone assignments, and you can trust him to be effective when he drops into those spots. And so, obviously, also the addition of bringing back Houston into that mix with Bowser. And with Owe and with Pierre-Paul, I think that you could see a pretty quick improvement, both one from the effectiveness of the package they can use, and then we've already talked about this a little bit, but also the freshness of those guys and not using the same, over and over and over again.
Yeah, they have other elements of deception they can use as well. I'm part of projecting ahead to a time when the Ravens have better health at outside linebacker is reasonable. The biggest change they're going to get is Bowser coming back and be able to play the Sam. They'll get a lot of coverage value out of him, and they'll be able to return Owe to having a reduced Sam role. I think he'll still keep some of it because he's looked good there, in my opinion. I think that's something he's done well here. And then he'll return to the rush side for a lot of times where they're just basically lining him up opposite the naked tackle. The tackle's not covered up by a tight end on that side. That's going to put him in a lot better position to fan out that tackle and use his arsenal of moves. I think we'll see much better productivity from him on that side. And when his attention isn't so divided between coverage and pass rush snaps. So I think that'll be a big deal for him.
I think, and I would just add that I think that you're underrating Justin Houston's contribution.
I'm not.
Bit. Okay,
he's been terrific. He's been terrific. The point I want to make is this is the NFL, and we're going to have a lot of injuries still. I think Houston has been arguably the Ravens' best pass rusher to date. Maybe even not arguably the Ravens' best pass rusher to date because they've asked Owe to do other things. But he's certainly been the guy. I'm concerned about them all being healthy at the same time. I don't think we're going to see much, if any, of Ajabo over this year. My guess would be right now. My guess is he's a 23 player now. If we do see him, maybe it's a December time. And the real reason to bring him back would be to get him in to practice, to make sure he doesn't lose the entire year developmentally. If you could get him on the field a little bit, you might have some fail forward moments with him. We talked about the Orioles. They're bringing up a whole lot of young talent right now. And particularly with hitters, young hitters who need to make adjustments and a lot of that, getting Gunnar Henderson to the major leagues was a big fail forward opportunity. Well, Gunnar Henderson's hitting the hell out of the ball at the major league level, so it didn't have to be a fail forward opportunity, but it is for a player like Ajabo to get on the field, have to play against NFL tackles, and really see some difference in what he's got to do. I think is a good thing, and then maybe it'll encourage him to go to a pass rush camp.
The only distinction that I would give there is that Mike Macdonald was Ajabo's coach last year at Michigan. And so the ability to use him as a chess piece in situations where you know that he can be effective, or in matchups for certain kinds of moves or tendencies, because you've directly coached him and made those calls, might allow them to accelerate that a little bit towards the end of this year.
Okay. So there's two components. One is value. No doubt about it. Completely agree. Macdonald is a terrific player to get value out of Ajabo. And if you're saying he could learn the scheme quicker, maybe that's true also.
Or just have a really narrow usage, right?
Yeah.
So we know that he's great on, right? Like I know he's really great stunting from like the right side, inside, between guard and tackle, or between guard and center, or whatever that looks like. And so maybe he gets 6 snaps a game, but they really maximize the use of those 6 snaps because he already knows him and he knows he could be effective there. That's really all I'm saying.
That'd be fantastic chess piece, and if that's all it is to get it back on the field, that's fine. I'm most concerned about the injury itself and whether or not. I mean, the worst possible thing would be he rushes it back, he practices, he gets some value out of it developmentally, we think, for 3 weeks. Then they say, you know what? Well, go ahead. We'll play his 6 snaps in these last 3 games of the year, and then he gets hurt again, and he loses 2023 because of it. So.
Fair.
All right. Real quick. They did not have a single instance of a simulated pressure in this game. Very unusual. They use simulated pressures a lot against younger quarterbacks. They did a fair amount against Mac Jones. But they, normally bringing guys up into the A gap, showing that double A gap blitz or at edge of the line of scrimmage plus an A gap is something the Ravens have really liked to do, whether it's Wink or Macdonald. But they did not do it even once in this game. And I think it's a nod to the ability of Allen to get the ball out quickly to whatever spot those two guys are going to be disadvantaged in trying to cover.
Yeah. I wouldn't say critical. I think that I'm one of the people that would take Lamar Jackson over Josh Allen. When given the choice, I think there are a lot of people, and independently, I think there are Ravens fans that would take Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson, and I think that's okay. I definitely fall in the former category. What I would say is that Josh Allen's ability to read defenses and the way that they spread teams out to give him the space to make those decisions has really, really improved and showed on the field. His ability to kind of spread out and then make the right call quickly, use his arm strength to his advantage, has been one that's allowed him to take away some of that gunslinger, reckless mentality that it seems like he had much earlier in his career.
Yeah. I think that's a valid point. And I don't really blame anyone for thinking Josh Allen is better, but I will say this: whatever metrics people think they have, whether it's passer rating, whether it's other elements, they just don't capture what Lamar Jackson does for the rest of the offensive players on his team. I think you really need to judge Lamar primarily by points per drive. And then if you don't really believe that, think back to who was on that 2019 offense. In particular, the receiving core did have Mark Andrews. They did have Yanda on the team, and Stanley were playing well. But, I mean, it wasn't an exceptionally talented group of players. It was probably a slightly above average, very young group, which is a nice combination to have. But they had Lamar Jackson, and when he makes everybody better, all of a sudden you've got a historic offense instead of just an above average offense. So I think I've heard comments made by Eric Eager, who's the former head of R&D at PFF, and he says that we're not completely capturing it, but what I'll say is try and enjoy the career of Lamar Jackson for what it is, because he is very great, and try and learn about football from it in terms of how he's impacting, how he affects other players. And I think that's the best way to kind of say it is that Lamar is causing other people to be out of position a lot of the times. He has a gravitational pull on defenses, and we can't necessarily easily put that into metrics. Because when we start, first of all, we got to go backwards and we got to grade a whole bunch of quarterbacks on how they did it, which is not much. And then you see it happening with Allen. You go, well, okay, maybe this is a thing that we need to start counting. Anyway, I understand the difficulty in really trying to get it into a metric.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, it's just, if this game wasn't, and I know we're on the defense, but if this game was not emblematic of the fact that all you have to do is put a good offensive line in front of Lamar Jackson and the team won't likely have success, like this was the perfect, I think, example of that, where Lamar had pressure in his face through the entirety of the second half. They couldn't get it going on the ground. The Ravens did not, because of, I think, the rain more than anything, didn't go kind of empty spread, because they'll lean into that when the running game stops working sometimes. And Greg Roman, I think, I dislike his use of tight packages, but he will lean into that empty spread looks, when they feel like they need to. And Lamar really shines in those moments. And so it was just put him behind a really good offensive line, get this thing tightened up, get Ronnie back out there. They'll be just fine.
Yeah. Well, I hope that, I certainly hope that's true. I'm looking forward to grading the offensive line tonight and see how things went. Harbaugh had some positive comments to make about Faalele in this game. And I really kind of want to see it for myself. So we'll be going through that. But one of the interesting things is whether Faalele playing well might actually hustle things up for Ronnie a little bit.
I see. I thought where you were going with that was whether Moses was going to lose his spot to Faalele.
Oh, I mean, that could happen too. But yeah.
I don't think Ronnie Stanley's to be rushed at this point. I think that there was too much pain and too much, like, both mental and physical, of his preparation to try and get back for last year, and then the effects of all of that and how that built in, plus the injury itself being as extreme as it is, that he's going to do what he's going to do now, and he's in a place where he's comfortable with that, and I'm okay with that too, as long as he comes back and plays at some point.
Right. I really don't mean to imply that Ronnie is somehow dogging it, because I don't really believe that. I believe honestly that he's trying to take care of this injury. One player who I think did come back probably too early, or maybe the correct question was he just never should have come back at all, is Dennis Pitta. And then we see some of the effects of that lingering multiple times, and you don't want that. It's a similar injury in that it happened at the very beginning of a contract, and he felt a lot of obligation to the Ravens to get back on the field. The Ravens probably pressured him to, honestly, to try and get back more quickly. Plus, he's Joe's best friend, so he wants to be there for him. And of course, we got all the bad news from that.
I've never doubted any NFL, any player, any football player that has scaled the mountain and been on an active game day roster in the NFL. I don't think that you can question any of their desires to play and be on the field and be there for their teammates. It's so few and it's so rare and it's so hard to get to that place that without some of that desire in you, you're just not going to make it, I think, for these guys. So I certainly wasn't trying to imply that you thought that was why, Ronnie would rush back. I just think that there is nothing that will rush him back at this point until he is 1,000% confident and ready to go. And I think Dobbins is a good example where the Ravens were like, hey, be patient. Mm-hmm. But when we cut you loose, we're really going to dial it up. We're not going to hold you back. So make sure you're ready when you are. And I think Ronnie has a similar mentality.
Yeah. That's a good analogy there. Analog. Anyway, let's continue on. We'll talk about some individual players here. You're the guest. You pick first. Comment. I'll return fire and then pick another.
Yeah, I'll start with Justin Madubuike. I mean, talk about, this is the jump that I think a lot of us thought was coming last year, from the performance in his first year. You could see his ability to be in one-on-one situations unblockable. We have definitely seen that now. And we've seen it both against the run and we've seen it against the pass. And I think that's probably the most encouraging thing about it, in that I think that a lot of people thought that Madubuike could be good, particularly as a one gapper rushing the passer. And there were questions of whether or not he could evolve to be potentially more than that. I think he's showing that he is. His awareness, the tip balls, best defensive player, I think, in the game for the Ravens this past week.
I might be, it's him or Owe, but I was very happy with what Madubuike did. I mean, one of the things is Madubuike plays a little more limited snap counts. He played 36 snaps in this one, which is good, but still a little bit less than 60% of the total they had on offense. So not unhappy about it all. Actually, it might have been exactly 60%. I think they had 60 60 snaps, at not including penalties and kneels. But multitude of things, and he showed it every way. The deflection, he leaped up while double teamed. That should not happen. I mean, offensive linemen have things they can do to stop defensive linemen from getting their hands in the air. And that was just a terrific play that, was a very big deal. And it would have been an even bigger deal if Queen had hauled it in. So it's one of those plays. The other thing was the 3rd and 1 play. And this was early on, Q2 12:02. He destroyed the right guard Bates. But what was worse about it is that everybody else around him is failing. So the other lineman who's next to him, I don't remember if it was Campbell or who it was on that exact play. I could probably look it up real quick. But the other lineman necessary was on the ground. So this play was not going to happen. He ended up getting help from Peters on the play, I think, as well. Or whoever, maybe that Peters might have been the -4. No, it was on the 3rd and 1 that he got the help from Peters on the 0-yard stop. But he made the play himself. It's just an outstanding individual play where things really had to break right.
He had 2 huge stuffs, and you just mentioned both of them in this game. And one of them was all him, and no one else was there. And that play was, I think, on a 3rd and 1 or
the 3rd and 1. First it was Q2 12:02, so it was early in the game.
And it was a monster. I mean, he's been really impressive, and I think, the point is well taken about needing to rotate those guys. The Ravens on defense will always be rotating those defenders. Mm-hmm. I do think, and, I alluded to this earlier, that a guy like Owe is going to benefit from not, maybe taking a few, a handful less snaps in games and see kind of that opportunity for him to get really dialed up. But Madubuike, I think there's room for him to take more snaps. The Ravens shouldn't hesitate to give him those. Been phenomenal this year. Really, really going to be interesting to watch and see his development and what ends up happening for his career with the Ravens.
They've opened up a spot now, and I'm going to move on and talk about Travis Jones since Brad is asking about him here. But there's an opportunity now for Madubuike to have a bigger role. And as a little bit of an undersized 3, it wasn't obvious that he'd be in there. And Broderick Washington still may be the guy who takes more of this. But when you face bigger teams, you want to have multiple bigger run defenders out there. And the opportunity to play Travis Jones as a 3, where we've all seen some great penetration from him, and Pierce as a 1 looked really great. Obviously, Pierce is gone now. It's going to have to be Travis Jones playing the majority of snaps where they really need a nose tackle for a nose tackle's sake. And then they may have Broderick Washington at the 3, but they may also have a lot of plays with Justin Madubuike in as a 3. And I think his style of penetration, his ability to ragdoll some of the guards he's faced in these one-on-one matchups you get from the 3-tech spot has just been really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think Travis Jones had a couple of high impact plays in this game. Mm-hmm. He's also, both him and Madubuike play really strong at the point of attack, especially in one-on-ones. And we've seen that now. We saw that from Jones in the preseason. We've seen that in kind of the limited snaps that he's taken in the season so far. I'm excited to see kind of his development as well, and kind of how he ends up getting deployed here over the next few weeks too.
Yeah, he only was in for 4 run plays. He made the stop on 1. It was a defensive win, I believe, on 1st and 10. He talked the guy down for a 3-yard loss, but it was a solo tackle with no assist. And that's what you need. You need interior linemen who make tackles and don't miss them on run plays, and keep the yardage to a defensive win to bring up those 3rd and long situations. So I like what we've seen from Travis. He didn't not have a pass rush event on 11 non-penalty snaps, but it's in the back of my head that he might have had a pressure on one of the 2 penalties where they accepted it. So I'm not 100% sure about this, but that's my thought. And might have possibly even been the roughing the passer that he got that he was in there for pressure. But anyway, I have to look at it to make sure I'm right about that. But anyway, we've seen enough certainly from in the preseason to know he's capable of delivering some good pocket push, some in your face one-on wins against 3-tech guards as a 3-tech against guards.
Yeah. Well, I'll take Marcus Peters next, who I think has come back from injury and just played phenomenally well. I mentioned earlier that I would, if the Ravens needed to sign him to an extension, I'd be happy to do so. I think he's the kind of guy that can stick around in the league a really, really long time, and he can be rotated to play safety if he needs to be, especially in kind of these in the evolution of the 2 high cover look type type opportunities. I think that, his career could last and there's a role for him to stick around with the Ravens, but he's played really well. We've seen all the things that you would expect from him, his ability to stay in man coverage, to be the guy that we thought he was going to be. The injury doesn't look like he's holding him back. Almost had the interception in this game, always in and around the ball, doesn't really seem to be out of place, really smart, main contributor. He plays with his heart on his sleeve. We saw that at the end of this game. I think that's why, for a guy that leads the league in interceptions, right? Even with that missed year or since he's been in the league, doesn't seem to get the respect from the rest of the NFL that he should. And I think it's because he is a little bit of a, boisterous, loudmouth player. And you know what? There's always a spot on the Ravens for a high impact, boisterous, loudmouth player.
Yeah, they've done very well with some odd characters. And, you can say a lot of things about the coaching styles of both Billick and Harbaugh, but they were very good at assimilating different personalities. And I think that's been true mostly of the defensive coordinators as well, in terms of their ability to mesh some very different personalities here throughout the years. Let's see. I would like to talk about Marlon Humphrey a little bit. Marlon, terrific back end of the play. He was actually not his man, and that Oweh had the underneath coverage of the player. Marlon was on another receiver, and he came up and made the play for the interception early on. Terrific everything on that play, but really like the fact that he was able to secure that football and then make a really nice run back on the play.
Yeah, and same kind of story. I mean, what was it in the Miami game? Of the 4 touchdowns they scored late, they were of the 16 plays that Marlon wasn't on the field, or it was 5 of 16 or something.
Well, he missed the last 2 drives in their entirety. He came out, so they scored 2 touchdowns. So yeah, it was bad.
And I think so anyway, he's just a huge contributor, makes a big difference on this defense. Good to see, from an overall leadership point. I'm seeing this comment here from Mike of Marlon being a top 3 corner. That's a tough question. I don't know that I call him top 3, but I definitely would say top 10.
It's a crowded list.
Yeah.
He's an outstanding cornerback, but I don't think I'd put him in the top 3 either. But you know what? It could be within this defense that we see contributions from Humphrey the remainder of the year that really make you ask that question again. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that he is that guy. We wasn't perfect as a tackler in this game. He had a couple of problems. One on the RL11 TD by Allen, run left 11. Humphrey slid by the play, and Allen was making a lot of people look bad on that play. But that was one problem he had. What else? It was flagged for defensive holding on a play where he gave up the reception anyway. I guess it's good when you don't get flagged for pass interference, but that was something. Otherwise, they didn't really throw at him too much in the whole game. I think it was only about 5 passes they threw to his side of the field.
Yeah, has that ability to really limit games, and even if he's not going to be regarded, as like the top corner or the same as like a Jalen Ramsey, like you said, his ability to impact this defense. And the ability for the Ravens to kind of how they call it and how they utilize it. And if teams continue to shy away from throwing at him, that's part of it. And also his awareness. We saw the same thing in the interception against the Patriots that Lamar threw, where the corner drifted off of his guy, was kind of aware of what the route tree looked like. And part of the reason Allen throws that ball a little off kilter on that interception, to Humphrey, is because Oweh is a big guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to avoid the big frame, the reach, the ability to get the tip, and he throws it high, too far to the outside. Knox isn't able to pull it down, and Humphrey is able to pull it in. But that awareness to recognize that's where the ball was going, and even come off a guy like Diggs, because
right.
Defenders can have blinders, and sometimes they need to have blinders, and especially with Stephon Diggs, maybe you should have blinders. But he didn't burn them in this game, and Humphrey was a big part of that.
2 weeks in a row, great plays by Humphrey coming off his own man, though. And in this game, it was Diggs, but in the previous one, it was Parker, right? That he came off of?
It was Parker.
And so it was a 4th and 3 play, and he had him locked up in press coverage off the line of scrimmage, and he released him at right about 5 yards and moved right down on, I think it was Stevens' guy who was going flat.
Yep.
And took him to the ground for short of the first down. It's just that's an unbelievable play for a corner to be aware of that much. And I think it almost looked like Marlon really planned for that to be the way that would work out with the press coverage. And maybe the play call may have been that way, but it might also have been Marlon just making that call.
Well, and Belichick loves to throw into the flats to like in those on pick situations and to running backs that are getting out there with blockers in front of them. So some of this stuff is just like flat out preparation too, where like understanding that like Diggs is running like this kind of route. I don't have to stay with him because they've either got help over top, or from what I've seen on film, I know that Allen's not going to try and make that throw, regardless kind of thing. And so, preparation, Humphrey deserves credit not only for the play that he made on the field itself, but the preparation to be able to put himself, in that situation overall.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I'm going to try and answer Chris's question here really quick. So did Geno Stone get on the field? Yes, he did. He was on for one play. It was the second to last play of the first half. It happened to be the play after Hamilton messed up against Diggs in the end zone.
And he gave up a huge pass to Dawson, right?
He did give up a pass on the right sideline to Dawson where he was the tackler. I gave up. Yeah, probably.
It was the only moment that I saw him, and I was disappointed. Like that was the moment the game felt like it got away. Not that play itself, but like that drive, or really the drive before that, when the Ravens had an opportunity to either put points on the board, go to half, get the ball back. And then all of a sudden the whole thing flipped. Buffalo ends up scoring, on that drive. And then it just the Ravens never got back in control of the momentum of the game at all.
Yeah. It's obviously it's not what you want, but that score at the end of the first half had me very worried. And yeah, it's a difficult game anyway, with a lot of Buffalo fans there. It's just, it had the confluence of things I do not want in a football game. A lot of opposing fans, which is I can deal with when I'm on the road. I'm not, because I expect it, but I don't really like it at home very much. Horrible weather. I mean, just constant rain and cold enough for this time of year that it's no fun. And then blow a big lead. You throw those two things in the mix. It's just about as bad as it can get. I'm feeling better talking football with you about it after the fact than I did for these last 24 hours or so, just working through the analysis of this.
Well, there was a lot of unlucky stuff in it. Everything that needed to go well in like the first quarter and 3/4 of a quarter. There, I'm doing it again here. I'm gonna keep running into the same words over and over. The first 1.75 quarters of the game, the Ravens, all the breaks seemed to go the correct way for them, and then for the last kind of 2.25 quarters of the game, all the breaks just seem to flip and start to turn and completely go the other way. And whether that was penalties, free rushers, drops, like all the drops seem to be happening to Buffalo early. Then the drop stop, and then, Allen fumbles the football, picks it up, runs for a first down. Like it's just, some of the things that you just wouldn't expect to happen that were breaking the right way early just turned around and didn't break the right way. And so sometimes, those things are going to happen. It was a 3-point game. The Ravens, it was frustrating because this is one that they shouldn't have lost. But the weather, I mean, could Baltimore play Buffalo in a game that is not like the outcome is not driven by weather? It would be really nice to see.
Yeah, it's true, and they've played Buffalo very very well when it's been nice weather in general, and the Ravens, frankly, with Lamar, are always going to be better when field conditions favor speed, when field conditions favor sure handling the football. And it's not, Buffalo did suffer from the weather in this. I just don't think they suffered as much. And that's really what it comes down to is, Lamar obviously had a much worse passing day from a yardage perspective. They had a real hard time getting anything going in the second half, even though his passer rating was similar and he ran for a similar amount of yards to Allen. That otherwise it wasn't the same. Who do we want to talk about next? So we've got a question here from JR about Pepe not seeing the field. We did kind of address this earlier in the first half of the show. What do you see as Pepe's role on this team going forward if he's not going to be the slot corner? Because you're happy with Stevens' play there.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're gonna, kind of talk about them in tandem, particularly given Pepe didn't play in particular, I was happy with the performance that Stevens gave. I thought that was the thing that felt like it was, he seemed to understand his role in the defense as that nickel guy and kind of play to it correctly in those situations and be well prepared for it. So, all that being said, is that Pepe's role and what we know is coming is that somebody is going to get hurt. Hopefully shorter term than longer term. And we're going to need corners to step up. It's what's going to happen. There's going to be opportunities in games. Maybe Stevens is going to have a bad game. I didn't think he interfered with McKenzie on the earlier play that the first pass breakup that he has. there certainly could be an argument that a flag could have come in that situation against him. I thought that McKenzie initiated the contact, so not the case. But, maybe that flag comes in and Pepe, they make the switch. I think he's got to be prepared and ready to come in. I think the Ravens are going to go with the hot hand of the player that's playing better in that inside guy and being the third defender of the receiving option when, Humphrey and Peters are in there together. So Pepe's going to get his shot one way or another in one of these games, and he's got to be ready to do it. And if he's out there, I mean, he's been dynamic when he has been. And so, hopefully when he gets that opportunity, he seizes it and, doesn't give the spot up.
The same thing goes for JAD in terms of he's going to get another shot this year. Opportunities come at the cornerback position. Because they're so subject to soft tissue injuries too, you get them on a 1 to 2 game basis. It doesn't even have to be a long-term injury necessarily. It can be hamstring pull. It can be the groin. It can be whatever it might be that gets you back on the field. It doesn't have to be some horribly debilitating knee or season-ending injury that gets him a lot of playing time. The Ravens also have some opportunities, hopefully at some point this year, to defend some big leads. I shouldn't say that because really 3 of the 4 games they've had a chance to defend big leads and haven't gotten it done. But hopefully they'll have more opportunities to defend big leads. And when they do so, they should have some opportunity to bring in some different corners at some point during a game if they can maintain those large leads into the fourth quarter.
Well, and I know we're talking about the defense. The frustrating part about this game, and quite frankly, the Miami game, is that, and when you look back at what the Ravens did in 2019, they defended their leads with the offense. They maintained control of the ball. They scored touchdowns towards the end of those games. They put the games, it could have been a 30, this game, as crazy as this sounds, could have been a 31-point game 5 minutes into the third quarter. Very easily. And for whatever reason, the Ravens offense cannot seem to get in sync. I think a lot of it, and you said you're going to do your analysis of the offensive line. I think a lot of it comes down to when the offensive line is in sync, they're playing well. When they're not in sync and executing, they're not. Surprise, surprise, welcome to the NFL. But you do that with Lamar and you go from being high octane, really effective to not. And you put 10 more points up on the board in the second half, which is a low output for the Ravens. And this game is out of reach. And so just super frustrating, in their inability to put that away. But I think you're right that we will see opportunities for Armour Davis, for Pepe Williams to see more opportunities. And I thought Armour Davis has played relatively well. I know the one Tyreek Hill touchdown, he looks like an idiot because he's just standing there because he thinks he's passing that receiver off to somebody else. That's not his fault. He got beat on one of those deep crossers in the Patriots game, but those are nearly borderline impossible routes to defend. Those
if they're thrown properly, they are. I mean, if the ball's on targets.
So the 15-yard, and that's what makes Mark Andrews so effective is he's really good at from the inside slot running that 15-yard deep crosser. And Lamar's great at finding him on those throws. So those are the 2 big impact throws that I remember of his. So I think these guys are going to get a shot, and I think that there's a chance that they're going to have an impact at some point this year in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when we make comparisons to that 2019 teams in terms of winning games with their offense too, I mean, that defense was fabulous too after they got it fixed. And I think I don't have quite the optimism you do because I'm still concerned about more injuries hosing us even further, in terms of how things look as Ravens fans here. But they do have some players that are still on their way back that should help the Ravens maintain leads. And Ronnie Stanley is one. And Tyus Bowser is another in terms of key players who got beat. One a third, Gus Edwards. And right now, there's plenty of weakness in that Ravens running back room to be cut. They haven't done it yet with Kenyon Drake, who has been inactive now 2 weeks in a row as a healthy scratch. That's unbelievable. And Mike Davis, they haven't cut him yet. But both those guys are just seat warmers at this point for Edwards coming back. And even finding another guy who's R or 1 on somebody else's practice squad that they like as a stylistic fit. If Justice Hill is, it seems like the Ravens may not have a serious injury on their hands, but if they did, it's a time to go out and find that speed guy on some other team's roster and bring him along now and see what you got.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Odafe Owe. I think he's a guy that we haven't mentioned.
We do. Can we talk about Hamilton first? Because I want to get to the questions as we kind of go through this. But Hamilton, JR mentions curious about how Hamilton fits going forward. High for a first rounder, not getting much time snaps, or is that a matchup / team specific thing? Couple of things going on here. right now for Hamilton to get in the game, the Bills did not present any real big nickel opportunities for Hamilton to come in. In fact, they played no big nickel. They played 100% standard nickel when they played nickel against 11. And the Bills, I think, did play some 12, and the Ravens probably still continue to play standard nickel on those plays with Brandon Stevens lining up against a tight end that would have been flexed. So anyway, in terms of how he gets on the field, you really got to have a dime package on for him to be in. And then we keep getting about one mistake per week from him in terms of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think that's a lot of the difficulty here at present.
Yeah. And then not messing up opportunities when he's in the game. I mean, we talked about it with Pepe. It's one of those things where you're in your spot, you're in a limited role. You can't mess up in the moments that you are in there. It's probably been carved down for you. So, I think there's an opportunity if he can learn and get caught up quickly. But to me, that's really the key is like, you can't be having any mental mistakes in terms of what's showing up on film. Because if you do, as soon as Hamilton comes into games, teams are going to attack him and they're going to try and find out whether or not he's fixed those mistakes. And if he hasn't, they're going to turn into big losses and big plays. And the Ravens defense, at least the way it's being coached right now or called right now, seems like they're trying to avoid that.
Yeah, it's in terms of how they're rotating players in, we see tolerance is fairly low for a cornerback who makes mistakes. So you had mistakes from Jalen Howard Davis, you had mistakes from Stevens in the Patriots game, Miami game, Patriots game, I think, right? And then they got replaced by Pepe, and I think we could see it happen again. And all three of those guys, I would see them as getting playing time as the time goes on. And you can add Hamilton as a fourth in that group as a guy who I think will get playing time. I hope they find creative ways to get Geno Stone on the field, because I think he's a guy we saw in the preseason was too damn good to be playing in the second half of a preseason game. He looks like Ed Reed out there when he's playing in the second half of a preseason game. Let's find a way for him to make contributions on the field. He's a good football player. Yeah,
I mean, Chuck Clark should be taking one of Josh Bynes or Patrick Queen snaps at inside linebacker sooner rather than later. I think we agree on that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Odafe Oweh, and then we got to call it for the day here. Fantastic, by the way, having guests and all the great questions. But you start.
Yeah, I mean, phenomenal game, right? Shades of the Kansas City game on the fumble. His arm strength when swiping at the ball when he is, I don't know, 2.5 yards away,
fully extended,
and his ability to rip and separate. Now, obviously, it was wet in this game. It wasn't wet in the Kansas City game, but his ability to rip in those situations, get the ball loose, and create opportunities, really impressive. And then you mentioned it a few times on the podcast so far, doing everything, not just in a pass rush role, not just kind of isolated in terms of what they're asking him to do and how he's doing it. Did a phenomenal job kind of, I think, across the board in terms of what they asked for him. Picked up the sack late in the game where he kind of got around the edge. Huge sack in the game at that point as well. Really, really high impact player and really great to see coming from him.
Had some containment issues in the game, but I'll focus on the positive as well. I thought, first of all, he got that sack while he was being pancaked. You see, he came around, did a little dip move on the outside. The right tackle, Spencer Brown, that's a Northern Iowa guy who a lot of people were high on. He didn't have a great game here, but he was pancaking him to the ground as he hit Allen. I was afraid that was one that might get called for roughing the passer because it did seem to be kind of low, but it was still, It's not late. It's not after the football was still there and all, but I think you're not supposed to hit the quarterback at the knee or below now.
It was the second. I thought the same thing, but it was the second guy that came in that whacked Allen on the head that I thought was going to draw the call. And Allen, like a little girl that he is, reached up and grabbed his head after the guy's hand brushed it, and he started pointing at his head and at Boger. That's when I thought the flag was going to come in.
I really saw something good out of Boger on that play. He said, "Stay down, stay down." As in, you're going to be out of play if you don't stop this flopping bull crap. So it was nice of him to do that, but I think the officials probably have been told, make sure the quarterback stays down after what's happened to Tua. We cannot afford to have another incident like that. So it did some good things against the run. I thought he held the edge at times. Well, there were other times where he lost containment. Definitely did not make the most of his pressure opportunities inside the pocket in terms of taking Allen down. I had him for parts of 7 pressure event, 1 quarterback hit, 1 sack. they're separate, even though those are overlapping statistics, but they're separate as I'm counting them. 4.5 other pressures, so very positive from that standpoint. And that didn't even include times where he flushed the pocket and forced Allen to run, which, by the way, didn't end up turning out that well when he did that. But it was still, those are additional real pressure plays. It's nice to see him play against a naked tackle like Dawkins again, and really, Dawkins, for whatever deficiencies he has, is still a professional offensive tackle, and Oweh beat him pretty badly the whole game. In fact, Madubuike beat him once too. It wasn't just him, but a good game, I thought, all the way around from Oweh. I read a stat that Oweh is leading the entire NFL in pressures as PFF counts them.
Wow,
which is amazing. He's being overplayed. He only missed, I think, 1 or 2 snaps in this game. I'll get the exact number here for you because I actually think that's important. But Oweh played 58 out of 60 real snaps. There's going to be a few more of those that include penalties, but it sounds like he only missed 2 snaps the entire game. That is not the Ravens' way to overplay an outside linebacker. So getting David Ojabo back for 6 snaps a game would actually be really nice to let Oweh have some time off. Having Justin Houston back would be wonderful. They'd both be extremely fresh. And you could rotate on 3 to make 2 if you had Bowser back, just the way they had last year. As a very effective threesome.
Yeah, I think that they could be really effective. And the one thing that I would say, and I think we're going to wrap up, so we won't probably talk about Patrick Queen separately, but I guess we see a little bit of like hero ball out of this defense at times. And it's like guys just need to understand where they fit within this defense. Don't try and go and make an explosive play. Like if Josh Allen, if you're coming free to Josh Allen and he's going to throw the ball over your head, trust that your defenders and the defense that's behind you on a back off balance throw is not going to be a great one, and let him do that. Don't let him pull it down and run away from you. Stay on your backside contains. Oweh definitely was culprit a couple times to like a little juke move by Allen and bit hard. And those could have been big stops in these games that would have made all the difference in the outcome overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more with that. And that's something that I'm probably more concerned when a player loses like a backside contain like that than a general missed tackle, because missed tackles comes in all shapes and sizes. You turn the running back in the backfield, you're probably doing your team a favor. It's probably a net positive, that missed tackle. You miss a guy in the secondary when you're the only last line of defense. Well, that's a lot worse. but losing backside contain is often a place where big problems occur on a play, and it's just over pursuit and not really understand the angles and a shifty quarterback and what he can do to you. Absolutely a ton of fun to talk football with you, Jordan. You've improved my day immensely, just the couple hours you spent here. And thank you, by the way, for spending 2 hours, because this is a ridiculous amount of time to ask a guest to spend. And I've already had people listening to the shows. I want to send this out to the other guests out there. I'm not going to force you to be on for 2 hours, and it's only certain people that I'm going to have on these live shows, because I know they're going to tend to go longer. Fantastic questions from the group here. Leave comments if you like this method of doing live shows. I'd love to do more of these. If this doesn't really do it for you, if it's not really special enough, and the questions are you just don't feel like we're doing enough to address them, leave that too, and we'll deal with that, and maybe deal with some other format if that makes sense. One more time, Jordan, where can they talk football with you?
Yeah, at Raven Sit Room, where I'm doing a podcast with Gabe Ferguson. He's at Gabe Fergie. It's at filmstudybaltimore.com as well, called The Situation Room, trying to break down games, talk a little bit more about the scheme, about the play calls, about the situations, and kind of what's happening in those plays. Not necessarily, execution or player outcomes is part of that, but really big picture and kind of what the Ravens can be doing to be successful, or have done, or could improve on to be growing. So we'd love to see you there. Have you guys tune in. Ken, love to be here. As soon as you come up with an idea that we can stretch these out for 3 hours, I'm happy to go there with you.
I think we have to do something different. Amazing. I got through the 2 hours without needing to go to the bathroom, which is really pretty good for me these days. So anyway, and don't laugh. You got this to look forward to, buddy. We all get to be men of a certain age, unless worse things happen sooner. So anyway, Jordan, really appreciate you having on the show.
Yeah, always happy to be here, Ken. Anytime.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.